Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. We're going to go ahead and give us about 10, 15, 20 seconds to let everyone kind of roll in here, and then we'll get started. Talking a little bit about our capacity planning today and dealing with new hires. I'll probably introduce the thing a little bit more as we get started here. So we'll give it a couple more seconds and we'll kick things off. Julia, are you excited?
I'm so excited. One of my favorite topics.
Yeah. Okay, I think, it's 12:01. Let's go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody to the fireside chat. Today we're going to be talking about how RevOps can help with capacity planning and supporting new hires. So this isn't just pure like RevOps world, but I think there's also a little bit of enablement stuff that we might kind of tease in here. And we're lucky enough to have Julia Hermann with us to help us out. And before I get to you, Julia, I have to do my intro. I almost forgot. So for those of you who don't know, Tyler Simons, I'm the head of customer success here at Fullcast, and we're a go-to-market planning and execution platform. Julia, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're up to?
Sure. Thanks, Tyler. So hi, everybody. I'm Julia Hermann. I'm currently the CRO at Velux, which is a legal digital intelligence company. So we provide lawyers with a lot of tools they need to help them win more cases and do their jobs a little bit easier. So I have been in my role at Velux only about a month and a half, but I have been in the RevOps space, I think, pretty much since the beginning of the RevOps space. I was doing it before it was even called sales operations or revenue operations. So I'm really familiar with a lot of topics and they're near dear to my heart. So really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Curious, before we get into the subject, what was the title that you held, like when it was like, if you really could define, sales ops as it was, what was the title back then? Like, did you have like an actual sales operations title, or was it something else?
No, I mean, I had so many titles. I had enablement, I had product manager, I had, lots of things, but yeah, I really had nothing to do with, I think they were more generic that they're like, okay, this kind of works, but not really, part of what I did. And again, I think the skills kind of developed through the years. So it would be like, I would pick up one piece and then another piece, another piece. And now like all together, we call that revenue operations. But before it was just like piecemeal of different responsibilities across different teams.
Super interesting. Okay, so let's talk about it. Let's start with like really what considerations should we take into consideration. So what should we think about when we're planning for new hires during the annual planning process?
Yeah, of course. So I think, the annual planning process is a really good time to really do a lot of analysis. Again, I think it's really important that you have these metrics and you're actually reviewing them on a monthly, at least quarterly basis. But I think, right, when the whole team is together and you're focused on the budget and really understanding what your goals need to be for next year, and, your finance team is going to be doing, a top down, you're going to be doing a bottoms up combination of, the different types of metrics. So, I think one of the really important things is to understand, sales productivity and really understand how much each salesperson can deliver in a territory in terms of, right, then you have to look at kind of what's your onboarding period, what's their ramp time, and really build and model that out so that, by month you can understand, if we hire somebody in January, what is their impact to the business versus if we hire somebody in May, and what is their impact to the business then, because it is going to be different. And you really want to make sure that you're calculating appropriate ramp times. And again, right, your productivity is going to be different by segment, by territory. So again, working in global companies for the last couple of years, it is that there's a lot of variations there. And if you just use your averages, I expect every rep to, bring in $1 million of new AR in the year, your model is going to fail miserably because you're not taking a lot of things into account. The other part you really need to do is you need to really figure out where your reps should be. right? So where does it make sense? Yes, you want to grow and you want to continue to increase your market share, but it's very possible that you need to adjust where your reps are depending on, where your target accounts are. Are they in the Midwest? Are they in Florida? Are you focused on one specific segment? Because this will also really create a hiring plan for the team based on the specific needs of the individuals and the business, really. And again, it's not just about sales reps. You have to consider all the other parts of your, revenue life cycle. Maybe you need more customer success managers. Maybe you need more SDRs. So you really have to do the analysis to understand what your business really needs. And if adding an extra headcount in that area is actually going to drive more revenue versus just splitting up, the leads that are already coming in between more people, which, at the end might not produce the results you want and decrease productivity.
Oh, man. So first, do you ever consider like seasonality in any of the ramp times? Like do you like take a look at that? And maybe your business is big in August. And so if you
Yeah.
hire somebody in January, they could take a full advantage of that. But if you hire someone in August, obviously you're not. Just curious to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, absolutely, Tyler. That's a really good point. So yeah, the way I actually built out my kind of rep productivities, I look at for a 10-year rep. So somebody who's, the average of people who are there over a year, how much are they delivering? And then I do break it out by month. So we look at, how much that, on average delivers in January, February, March, and so on. Because again, end of quarter also tends to be busier versus, beginning of quarter, summers, especially in some parts of the world like Europe, they tend to be very slow. So that's my average, right? And then based on role, I then have my ramp schedule so that I know for my inside sales, I need them 2 months to even start seeing results. And then, it could be up to 6 months until they reach that full productivity. So I actually have like very detailed modeling of how I model out all the sales new hires, their, start dates and what their impact to the revenue is going to be, because it is going to be different. And that's why I said you can't just take an average. You really have to model it out with seasonality, looking at it, because a shift in 1 month could actually mean you're missing a quarter that's 2 quarters out, right? And they're not going to be here for the big September close of Q3 if you're on a calendar.
Yeah, do you when you're going through this process, do you just kind of like run through like, okay, let's hire these people and I'm making this up. We're going to hire 3 people. We're going to hire them January, July, and September. And then you're like, okay, this is kind of where I land with the number, but it's not quite right. So I'm going to make some tweaks and then run it again and then make some tweaks and run it again. Is this like an iterative like modeling process that you go through? Or is it when you set it up, you kind of just know, okay, these are the right timings to hire people based on where we need to go?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different considerations. One is obviously, I think, HR capacity. I want to make sure I don't have all my hires scheduled for February, because then I know my HR team is going to kill me because there's no way they can hire all these people in February. The other part is, again, you really have to look at time of year. When do salespeople actually look for a job? It's usually after they get their commission checks, So around the February, March time, it gets busy. In the summers, it's a little bit slower. And then Q4, it's really hard to hire good salespeople because they want to stay and earn their commission payouts for the rest of the year, depending, again, if the company is on an annual fiscal calendar. So it is a little bit of modeling of, I'm estimating this is how much my existing reps need to produce. Here's how much I need my new reps to produce. And then, right, you kind of play around with it. And again, depending on, you have to work really closely with your finance team and CFO to understand kind of because there's budget implications on both sides, right? The costs and also the impact to the business. And again, when you're doing this modeling, it's really good to understand not just what your plan is for next year, but where ideally you need to be in the next 3 years, because you really do, especially in an enterprise sales cycle, you have to hire people way ahead of the time, because, not only does it take longer to get them ramped, but then a sales cycle can take, 9 months to a year or more in some places. And then you're looking at them being contributing to your, next year's budget and not even the budget you're building right now.
Yeah, there's a company that we work with that's got a 2 year, I think it's 2 year, or maybe it's 18-month ramp for a rep. just for rep like ramping. And then you think about like the deals that go beyond that. So that's stuff to think about. Like 3 years is probably the minimum they look into the future. What about attrition? How do you like figure out like how much attrition you're going to have or make an assumption there? And then how do you kind of plug that into the model?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's part of the equation. So that I mentioned, right? I look at what I expect my current reps to deliver without adding any new headcount. Then I take a discount of attrition. So I take a look and, again, depending on your company averages, and this you really should know by working with your HR and finance teams of like, how many reps did we actually lose in the last 12 months? And again, was it forced attrition? Was it, poor performance, and really break it down. And then you pretty much have a model or at least an estimate. But, for me, I want to say 20% is usually like a safe bet if you really don't know what your rep attrition would look like. And then I actually take that out of the equation because again, we talked about ramp, how long it takes to ramp, then how long it takes them to get productive. So if I have a new rep replacing a tenured rep, even if I literally lose one today and get the other one tomorrow, their productivity is not going to be same for the year because it is going to take them a little while, even if literally we just hand that person a book of business. Again, there's always a decrease in revenue that happens. So I make sure that I build that in my model so that during the year, when we do lose people, we're not kind of caught off guard and all our numbers are now off because we now have less revenue coming from our reps than we need to actually collect.
And then you can avoid the scramble.
Yeah.
What do we do? What about like, so this is interesting because I've seen our customers do things a couple different ways. And there's this like peel and grow strategy, which is like, okay, we're going to hire someone. So we're going to peel a bunch of accounts out of territories to build a new book of business or a new territory. And we're going to do this. So it's like peeling out and then growing. And then there's also like pre-carving territories at the beginning of the year for all these new hires. I think you and I have talked a little bit about this, and this will probably lead into just how we set people up for success with SDRs and marketing, but just curious to hear your perspective on pre-carving out books of business or kind of this peel and grow method.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I don't even know if it's called peel and grow, but it is peel and grow now.
It's the first time I'm hearing that terminology, so I don't know. But
I'm going to coin that term, taking advantage of it.
Yeah, so for us, again, it really depends on when you're going to hire people. If that hire is not slated until November, it's very hard for you to say, I'm going to sit on this book of business all year and not give it to somebody. So what we also do is, again, we build that into the hiring plan. We know for each individual what territory they're going to have, and then figure out, right, how long, if somebody is covering part of those accounts that we want the new rep to have, how long they technically should be covering them. And we also create, essentially revenue splits before, right? So this doesn't create a surprise for the rep, like mid-year, they're losing their accounts. They've already know what their book of business is. They know what they're definitely keeping, what they're, holding. Best practices, we try to limit that holding as much as possible because obviously they're not going to pay attention to it if they know that they're going to eventually be splitting commission with somebody else when somebody new comes along. But, especially in a growing business, like there's so much territory to cover that you want to make sure that as much as possible, the accounts that are active and you have engagement is continue to get covered. And the ones that can kind of wait a little until you get that next salesperson, they do kind of sit on the bench. So we carve them out. And what we do with those accounts is essentially they're assigned to the manager. So again, if there's any activity or anything happens, they do bubble up and they can assign them to one of their reps if there is activity. But what we also do is we, with these carve outs, when we know, okay, this person's going to be hired, they're definitely coming. We have a start date 2 weeks out. Hopefully they're there if we did our jobs right. At that time, we also make sure that we kind of look at that list again. Are these the right accounts? Because, during the interview process, you also uncover so many things. And, I think that's why it's also really important to get your revenue operations team part of that interview cycle, because they really uncover a little bit more in terms of making sure the territories and things that are actually alignment with the skill set of that rep that you're interviewing. And then again, if they have an amazing relationship with this one account, probably want to give them that account. So again, the other part of how we do it is, and how we justify the splits and the movement, is we actually assign quotas for accounts. So if you have 10 accounts, I'm actually giving you a quota per account. So if you lose an account, I could potentially, lower your quota. But if I give you accounts, I can actually also increase your quota. Again, we try to be very reasonable and not do this too often, because it will drive reps crazy and our HR teams, because they have to resend commission plans anytime we make changes. But at least the expectation is there so that it's not a surprise. I think for me, the biggest thing is just making it really transparent to the reps of what they're in charge of, what's happening, and how their commission and quota is determined. Because if they have that transparency, they also feel much more comfortable with the number. And you get better results when they're comfortable, and then not just like taking out their calculator and trying to calculate, okay, how are they screwing me on commission or with my plan? Because that does happen a lot.
So I have a couple questions, but the first one is related to, so you talked about RevOps being a part of the interview process. And I think that's super interesting. And, when you say, I'm thinking like, oh, some RevOps professional is going to be in like interviewing the rep and having feedback. Is that actually a correct assumption? Or do you mean just like part of hearing what this person's like, what their expectations are, and kind of tracking along on that hiring process?
It's both. So again, I think your sales, RevOps person, it should be a counterpart, right, to your sales team. So your VPs of sales, your sales managers, and they have very different ways a lot of times of how they perceive what good looks like. So again, on the RevOps side, we also work on enablement. We work on training, right? So we work on the messaging and how to get that point across. A salesperson could be very, very good at just talking and make an amazing impression. And again, because you have a sales leader, like it's very similar personality types. So a lot of it is just like, oh, this person's awesome. They are saying all these right things. We go like 3 steps deeper, right? We ask them about what they do to generate pipeline, how they cover their territories, like much more detailed questions that are a little bit more like operational, so that again, we also understand if they're going to be a good operational partner for us and not just say all the right things, but may not deliver. Yeah. And again, yeah. And a lot of it just goes to like the types of personality on the sales teams and the type of skills you want, right? And I think sales managers are really, really good at assessing some skills, but not all. When you have that counterpart, I think it's just really helpful because otherwise, a lot of times you'll also end up with a sales manager who just has 10 reps of company that they worked with in the past that, they've already all worked together. And it just also doesn't provide a lot of diversity on the team, right? Because you want new ideas, you want different ways to approach things. And not to say it's bad to work with people that you worked with in the past. I think it's an amazing thing. I just think it's also really good to diversify and explore a little bit outside. So at least you have a handful of people bringing different ideas versus just the people that have been together for the last, number of years.
Makes sense. I want to move on, but I just want to hear a quick snippet on just how do you expose? So you talked about setting essentially a quota number on an account. And I mean, there's a million ways to calculate that, but how much of that process or that like algorithm or whatever's the meat behind that number, how much do you expose to the rep? Is there a big transparency? Does that help build trust? Or do your reps just kind of like take that for face value and they're like, great, that's great. I'm just trying to think about like, if I'm a rep and I'm getting this account and I don't feel like it's a good account, but it's adding to my quota, how does that work?
Yeah, so it's definitely, we try to be as transparent as possible. And honestly, if my reps ever want to say, I don't want to cover this account, take it away from me, give me a different account, more than happy to do it, because I want them to work on the book of business that they feel comfortable that they're going to actually close. Because again, you might have great accounts, but they might not be the best accounts for this rep based on their previous experience, their relationships, and what they know about the market. So I try to provide as much transparency as possible. Like we will literally sit down and go through all the numbers with them. Again, depending on how big your organization is and how complex your modeling is, it might not always be an option, just because sometimes you really do have to do a lot of math. That's not even Excel math, but like database and SQL queries. So it might not always be possible, but I think, again, as long as you give them at least transparency in the process and like, listen, I know you can't follow all the data, but this is how we got there. And if you want to make changes, like we can totally make changes. But at the end, like we need you to deliver this number. So if you want a different account to get there, we can make that work, as long as obviously the modeling works. So that's usually, again, it's not a problem. There's so many companies in the US and global that, I've yet to see full penetration of a market that you can't switch accounts.
It's awesome. So we've hired somebody. How does RevOps help with the hiring, like the onboarding process?
Mm-hmm.
They come in.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we hire someone and they hopefully start on the first day, what we also do is that territory that we talked about, right? Now we've kind of finalized it, right? Essentially, because we had the carve out when we were doing the budgeting. Now this person's starting, we see if there's any swaps that are needed based on their skill set and if they have any relationships. And then we actually hand those accounts to the SDR team and to the marketing team to start warming them up. Because the last thing you want to do is, a rep starts and all their accounts are cold. They've never heard of your company. They have no idea. So you really have to start engaging them and making sure that we at least get a little bit of traction, especially while that person is onboarding, because then they can slowly start to at least get like a little bit of inbound activity that's generated from the outbound we're doing, versus just having to completely cold call their entire list. So it's really important to do that, because it is a little bit of a process. It's very rare that a large company, the first email you send them, they're going to be like, yes, I want to talk to you, get me on the phone with sales right away. Usually it takes a little bit. So you just want to make sure you start that process before they start, when you definitely know they're coming and which accounts they're going to have, because if you don't, the onboarding is going to take longer. They're going to take longer to get productive, because it does take time to kind of warm everything up. I think in terms of also onboarding, we also, now going back to enablement, we have, we always build out kind of an onboarding checklist. So you can obviously build whole programs, and there's a lot to do on the onboarding side. I think that's a whole conversation by itself, but at least have a checklist of like, if I'm a sales rep at your company, what do I really need to know? And what do I need to know the first week, the first month, and, the first 3 months, and then kind of stack it out for them so that they know, okay, this is the content I need to consume in my first week. Here's what I need to do in my first month. And then here's what I do, in the first kind of 3 months and longer, depending on how long your onboarding time takes. And again, I think the really important part is that they're not alone in this process. So obviously they have their manager, but depending on your sale, AE to manager ratio and how many people you're hiring at once, it is very difficult for just the manager to control this. And then also, right, each manager could have a different style and different things they want. So you're then also losing that kind of consistency of the messaging and the methodology and everything you want to be more central. So what we also do is, we have the combination of the on-demand, so you watch things on your own, but then the in-person, where you actually meet with a fellow group of new hires that are, starting in the same month as you, and you do practice, right? You do practice on the value, on the positioning, how do we actually pitch our products, and, pitch it in a way that is, very customer centric, not just shoving features down your throat, but I really want to understand what's going on with your business and things like that. So again, depending on the tenure of your sales reps, some already know this, but it's still really good practice, because I've seen reps who've been selling for 30 years and they still have the first slide of like, let me tell you about my company. That's not your first slide, right? You don't even know them. You don't know what they're here to talk to you about. So it's really important. I think, we all need reminders. We all need refreshers. And I think it's just really important to kind of focus on that first. The other part that we do, we actually also give a new hire buddy, so a mentor. And this is a wonderful opportunity for a sales rep who's been there for a while and, they're trying to get into management and they're trying for that next level. But again, there's only so many managers you can have. It's a great opportunity to give some of your more senior reps kind of additional responsibilities and a learning opportunity for them to coach a person that just started. And I don't want to say more junior, it's more just newer to the organization, right? And again, I think this provides a lot of learning on both sides, and you always have someone that's not your manager to go to when you have questions, because realistically, like sometimes you really don't want to go to your manager because they're gonna, you don't want them to judge you for stupid questions, even though everybody says there are no stupid questions.
I think it's super smart. I think that's should be standard practice in every org to have a mentor, because you're right. It's a different relationship type of thing when it's your manager. And, when you have a mentor that's in seat, that's doing the same thing, there's kind of this I don't know, shared connectedness, if you want to call it that. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And we even incent them a little, right? Like we actually, when the new hire closes a deal, like we actually give that mentor a little something, like a little commission on top, right? Not a split, but just to encourage them to be a little bit more involved. Not enough to drop their book of business to work on it, but enough that they have some skin in the game. Because again, right, if you're not in it for the experience of learning and being a manager, at least maybe you're in it financially. And I'll mention one more part on the onboarding. It's really important to have them listen to actual calls, right? If you have Gong or any of those other great recording features, fabulous, right? If you don't, at least an SDR or BDR is getting on the phone, have them listen in, because it's really important to hear those conversations and what your prospects or customers are asking. So then when they eventually get on the phone or in a meeting, they're just that much more prepared. If you go in completely cold, I think, especially if it's a newer industry, you might be more surprised of the types of questions that are asked. And let's be real, they don't listen or watch every FAQ we give them on here's your top. It's just when you hear it yourself, it's a lot more impactful.
Yep, I agree. All right, so we got a couple minutes, but I do want to talk about, just dealing with the unexpected, right? Like hiring late, for an example. What are some of the things that RevOps does with helping us deal with these unexpected happenings? Because we had our plan, but oops, guess what? We missed a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, plans usually default from the plan probably day one of the first year, because things are always changing. And usually you're creating your plan, hopefully at least a couple of months before your year actually starts. So the number one thing I think is build a buffer. Right. I can't stress this enough. We always have a buffer between our A's, our managers, the VPs, and then the top number, because you really want to make sure that, yes, you're building in a churn, like rep attrition expectancy, you're building in when we expect new hires, but things always happen, right? There could be hiring delays. We just can't get a candidate in Minnesota when we really, really needed somebody in Minnesota. Things happen. So build that buffer so that at least if these little things happen, as long as it's not in a complete hiring freeze, that at least you have a little bit of room. And then again, make sure you try to make up for it. So if you hire one person late, then your next hire that's slated for May, see if you can hire them in April or in March, right? Because that the first one already took you longer. And then that's actually just a good practice to have in general is, we always, as much as possible, try to hire ahead of plan. So if I know I need somebody to start in May, we'll already be looking for 2 or 3 places, right, starting in February, just because it does take a little bit longer. In Europe and Asia, it takes even longer because you have much longer notice periods. So it's really important you also understand the market you're in and how long it takes to hire people. So that's just really, really important. And sorry about that. Always fun. So that, and also it gives you a lot more flexibility, right? Because if you have somebody who's not performing, or you have somebody who leaves, you already have great candidates in your pipeline that you could be like, all right, now I'm ready to hire. So we always try to keep interviewing and really try to keep engaging if we know, especially for a certain role, we're going to have numerous options, potential to hire through the year, because it is really great to make sure you stay on top of the plan. And then if that really doesn't happen, I think the other thing you really have to do is you have to be very proactive with your sales managers, your CRO, your head of finance. We're going to miss our plan. Like, there's no way now, we're so far behind that, yes, maybe we're still hitting our numbers in Q1 and Q2, but come Q4, it's just not going to happen because we have a plan that goes like this, and it's based on so many new hires that we didn't make. So again, the more proactive you can be about it, the more that can be done on the other side of the house, because then there's other things that could be taken into account and adjusted before you get to December, and then everybody's yelling at you, why did we miss our numbers?
Yeah, I was laughing because I was just thinking about the original day one comment about how the plan is gone. You're just like day one, you go to finance, CRO, we're gonna miss our plan. Just like, anyway.
Hopefully it's not day one. If you did it on day one, you really didn't make a good plan. So if that happens, you should, watch some additional shows and get additional information. And again, there's plenty of good resources out there to help with that. But yeah, ideally you build in those buffers so you have some space.
We are a little bit over. I don't know if you have a couple extra minutes. There is one question I think would be super quick to answer.
Sure.
So the question is tips for calculating ramp.
Oh, that's a hard one.
Make it super easy, right? Look at your historical data.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what it is. So again, I think what I look at is when they're fully productive, right? So on average per month, they're contributing as much as a 10-year rep is. That's fully productive. And then you got to figure out, well, what happens here? Time to first sale is, one of the benchmarks. So how long does it even take to put a number on the board, right? I don't care what kind of number it is, just a number on the board. So you look at that, and before that, literally you zero them out. There's zero revenue for the first 3 months, first 4 months. If they happen to close more, awesome, but don't plan on it. And again, I think that's the difference also between having a budget and like a model, but then also having goals, because yes, for a new hire, like potentially you could give them some kind of quota, but as long as obviously it makes sense and it's still reasonable, I wouldn't give them something just because we need to give them something. But again, there's a lot of things you can do there. And then that time in between their first sale to the time that they're fully productive, again, it's data analysis. Look at your historics and really look at it by segment, by rep type, by geography, because it is going to be different depending on your products, and also the products. Maybe if you have specialized sales on different products, it is going to take longer. So there is no quick, I think, answer, but if you at least figure out when your fully ramped time is and that first deal closing, hopefully that other window is a little bit of smaller. So you could just play around with the math a little bit if you don't have the exact data you need. But yeah, just make the best estimate you can, but try to be realistic. I really try to be more realistic than optimistic when it comes to setting goals.
I think that's fair. Because then you don't have to tell finance or anybody else that we're going to miss plan.
Yes, never want to do.
I think we're out of time. Julia, do you have anything else? Do you like a parting thought for us? And then we just kind of wrap up here.
Sure. I mean, I think a parting thought is really just don't forget about current rep attrition. It's I think the number one thing most people forget about when they do the planning, because people will leave, right? No matter how amazing your company is, people will still leave, right? For many different reasons. Some of them have nothing to do with you and your company. So I would say that's probably the most important thing if you take anything away from today. And then the other is just do your best on the math. It's fun, but Excel is your best friend.
Yeah, I certainly would have underestimated rep attrition. I think I probably would have put it at like 5 to 10%. So that would have been my mistake if I would have went through this process.
Well, you got to look at the data, Tyler. Maybe for you,
I know, but maybe it is 5 to 10%. I don't know. Maybe I'm right. Julia, thank you so much for taking the time. It's amazing just how fast like 30 minutes just flies on by for us. I think that's it. Everybody, thank you for joining us.
Thank
And
you.
until next time, see ya.